Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's event. Our energy future. Is nuclear a viable power source? So my name is Daniel, and I'll be your MC for tonight. It's really encouraging to see so many people here tonight, and thank you all for making the effort to come. I know that there's a lot of people that have got property that they need to prepare for what is looking likely to be a pretty severe storm in the next few days. So thank you all for coming out tonight. Hopefully tonight will be a very insightful and thought-provoking event for many of you. We are trying to be as open and open-minded and as honest as possible when it comes to what can sometimes be quite a toxic debate. We're going to explore it from multiple perspectives. Mainly that sits around the aspects of environmental impacts, economic impacts, engineering capability, political impacts, and social impacts. To formally welcome us to country, it's my honour and privilege to introduce Kerry Neal, Director of Tribal Link and Cubby Cubby Elder. Thank you, Kerry.
And before I start as well, I need to apologise to everyone. I got no teeth tonight, but I usually have teeth. But I broke them on the weekend with my young son. I was eating some delicious peanut brittle. It's so delicious. But now my plastic plate is no more. So before, it's a real great pleasure to be here. And Daniel, thank you. It's a long time no see, mate. It's really great to see you, sir. I'll pay my respects to all the people in here tonight. I know that each one of you, carries some wisdom and carries some knowledge that, that you're sharing tonight, and we're going to be listening tonight. And I really want to say thank you so much for taking the time to share with us some of the things about. Am I allowed to tell you what I really believe or not really? Okay, great. Something that I think is extremely iffy, in my opinion. And I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody, and I'm only going to talk on my own opinion tonight. But before I do that, in our language for hello, we say nada. Can everyone say nada? Nada. Can you say wanya? Wanya. Wanya nalam. Well, as you know, wanya nalam means welcome everybody, and nada means hello. And, one of the things that the elders taught me, from listening to those stories, especially from this particular area here, Coolum. Coolum, everyone knows Gulam. He was a great warrior. He was a great a man. He was a tall man, handsome man. He was so handsome, in fact, that he looked like that guy, but, bit darker, but, But, he wasn't famous because he was handsome. He was famous because he shared. And he shared something, He left a legacy for us, continuing to share knowledge and culture and things. And there was a man in the north who came, and his name was Nindari. And we know he was a regimental leader. He was a proper leader. But something happened on the inside, And I think that, listening to those stories, Coolum was remembered because he shared. And you know what? I believe 100% if we don't learn from our mistakes in the past, if we don't learn from those other people's mistakes in the past, if we don't remember that the Great Artesian Basin is not far from here, it connects basically the south to the north. And if we don't remember those things, maybe there will be no one here to share. You are most welcome here today. This is home for all of us. And I hope that we can keep it that way.
Before we begin, I just thought I'd give people a short primer on nuclear power and the nuclear industry. For those that only have a cursory understanding of what's being discussed tonight. So nuclear power is, for all intents and purposes, well understood technology, and it is inherently safe to operate with modern safety standards. Nuclear power is considered a zero emissions energy source, and it operates in much the same way as producing electricity with coal. insofar as we superheat a liquid into a gas in high pressure and we push that gas through a turbine. And a steam turbine turns at 50 hertz and 240 volts and comes down the wires and comes into our homes. In this regard, there is no question that any politically and geographically stable country can operate one or even many nuclear power plants without any issues, save for the social impacts and the political will to do so. The question, however, is should they? And that is why I'm sure you're all here tonight, to answer that question. Should we investigate nuclear power as a viable option? And to answer that question, hopefully, and give you some more knowledge on the topic, is a wonderful panel of speakers who have given up their time tonight for your knowledge. So the first speaker tonight is Professor David Hood, member of the Order of Australia. He's a board director on the ACF. Professor Hood is a civil and environmental engineer with a vast experience across major civil and military projects, professional development in emerging economies, and a senior management in both the public and private sectors, as well as education. Professor Hood has been named as one of the top 100 sustainability leaders in the world, featuring such prominent names as Al Gore, Jane Goodall, and Tim Flannery. He's a passionate advocate for action to address global heating, resulting from the burning of fossil fuels. If you could all put your hands together and welcome to the stage, David Hood.
This is a fantastic crowd. I'm very pleased to see that you're all interested in what we're discussing tonight. That's great. May I add my acknowledgement of country. We're on the Mudjimba country, I believe, and pay my respects to the Cubby Cubby people and their elders, past, present and emerging. Boy, we are facing a very difficult and tumultuous period at the moment. There's so much turmoil facing us across all facets of our existence. But for me, the greatest threat is the disruption to our climate and the impacts that it's bringing from savage storms, associated destructive winds, rain, bombs, devastating floods, and then these are followed by severe droughts and heat that we haven't had to cope with ever before. And this is bringing about bushfires and loss of nature, and creature habitats are disappearing very fast. The Earth's self-correcting ecosystems, the planetary boundaries, if any of you have studied the planetary boundaries, cannot now cope to fix and resurrect it. So we have this dilemma ahead of us. And these are sort of compounding issues. We see ice is now melting right around the globe, particularly in the north and in the Arctic, and also frighteningly now in Antarctic. And we will see sea level rise, which is happening and accelerating right now, but it's going to bring devastating impacts not too far away. Species extinction is at the highest rate it's ever been in probably millions of years, happening right now. The number of species going extinct every day is frightening. If you know, I think it's something like 400 species a day. That's including the millions of insects and billions of other things that live on this planet going extinct. These are frightening things. And then somewhat associated with all of that, we're in the middle of terrible political disruption. The situation frightens me, what's going on in the world. And it's beyond understanding. We're trying to find the reasons for it, but I don't believe we can. The loss of respect for science is flooding our digital platforms. And that's feeding into a political situation where we're seeing authoritarian politics taking over and people turning to dictators for solutions to the problem. These are things that we can't escape, despite our sort of attitude, which I see from people with an arrogance and we're better than nature and it's all happening regardless. I don't think so. So what can we do? We could spend a whole semester going through all of those issues. But for me, I think we should just focus on one thing, and that's the crisis of eliminating greenhouse gases, which are the cause of our climate disruption. The burning of fossil fuels for the energy that we need. And we're going to look at just what are the alternatives to the burning of fossil fuels. Don't get me wrong, burning coal, invented by engineers some time back, has given us the high standard of living that I've enjoyed and you probably all enjoyed, I hope, and are still enjoying. But we must change. The era of coal and fossil fuels is over. It must be. It's critical if we're to get climate restoration. Our current fleet of fossil generators is at the end of life. They are now unreliable and extremely costly to maintain. And we've seen some even explode in our own state here through bad management and maintenance issues. But we have a source of energy that pours in from our sun, which just by the way is a nuclear reactor, but it's not the nuclear reaction that we're going to talk about tonight. It's fusion, not fission. And fission is the one we'll focus on tonight. The sun is an endless and continuously source of energy that's pouring in, and capturing and converting it to electricity is now cheap and easy, and it's getting cheaper. But some are proposing another source. Energy released from the splitting of heavy atoms. This is nuclear fission. About 10% of the world's electricity is actually generated from the heat that you get from nuclear fission. That's happening in about 31 countries. France, Belgium and Ukraine are the big examples where there's more than 10%. And it actually results in about 3,700 terawatt hours per year of electricity generation. Compare that with the current renewables input to the world's energy is about 30%, or 9,000 terawatt hours. That's happening. So should Australia consider starting from zero? That's our question. To build a nuclear capability, and it is starting from scratch. We have absolutely no capability whatsoever in Australia for delivering a nuclear industry. Let's look at what we would have to do if we wanted to go ahead with it. We'll have to change the existing laws. You all know that there's a federal law which bans consideration of nuclear energy. Most of the states, I think all the states, have a similar ban on nuclear energy, and a lot of councils and shires around Australia have said no nuclear power in our jurisdiction. So how do we go about that? It won't happen quickly to change laws. You don't just get up to Parliament and say, let's have a new law, sign it, and off you go. Enormous consultation of our community will be necessary. And it must be supported by credible evidence. And that's going to be difficult at the moment. And demonstrated by a local and trusted capability. I can see years in trying to get the laws changed to start with. Then we need feasibility studies. We've heard that there are 7 sites around Australia proposed. These will have to be examined thoroughly by experts. Where are they coming from? We don't have them at the moment. So there's a problem. Would you like Chinese experts to come in and say, it's okay there, right next door to you? I don't think so. Only one nuclear engineering course is available in Australia at the University of New South Wales, and it graduates very few nuclear engineers per year. It's part of their mechanical engineering faculty. And finding sites themselves is going to be problematic. Coal generators, as we all know, are sited next to huge sources of water, beside a river or a lake, because they have to cool the generation capability, waste heat. This is not a problem with nuclear because you don't need the transport of the little nuclear pellets can be done in trucks, but through urban areas, that's problematic. So there's little problems there, but not as much as coal. So siting nuclear reactors has got to be somewhere where you can get massive sources of water. And just to give you a bit of a picture, the current 1,600 megawatt nuclear reactor will use about 2,000 litres of water per second to cool the generator, the bit that's actually heating, where the atoms are being split. And that you don't shut that down quickly. Even after you turn it off, you've still got to pour cooling water through. Not through that, but the water that's in there has to be cooled continuously. That water's contaminated, so you can't take it out. You have to cool it through an interchange. That is going to be a huge problem of finding that source of water. Do we go in and dig up the artesian basin and use that? We just heard how problematic that might be. And this is in the second driest continent on Earth, I just might remind you. Then if the laws are changed and the public's agreeable and the sites are all accepted, we need funding. Yes, we've got some funding. Okay, let's begin the design phase. Okay, so where do we get proven designs? Do we go overseas and just say, okay, let's buy them from Korea? What do we face then? There's no regulatory framework in Australia. There are no standards for nuclear operation in Australia. We do have a nuclear reactor, a tiny medical facility at Lucas Heights, but it's not a power factor generator. So we'll have to go through the process of writing all the frameworks. That involves governments, both federal and state, and probably a lot of councils get involved into it. And that's going to take a long and very difficult period. Let me tell you from my experience, I was 4 years on the board of Standards Australia. My life has been in the built environment, and I know how difficult it is to write regulations around building. You try and get sustainability and green issues embedded in the current building industry. It's been horrendous. That's why I look so old. The consultation periods involved in it are going to be enormous. So we've got to change the laws, we've got to go through all the finding of experts, we've got to then do this regulatory framework, and then construction could start. Whoops, we have no companies in Australia with any experience whatsoever in the construction of nuclear power generation. Again, do we import foreign construction capabilities? Let me just say that the construction of a nuclear reactor and the associated facilities is incredibly different. In Australia, we build high-rise buildings beautifully. We've done roads, we've done bridges. We're world-renowned for our engineering, civil engineering capability. But not nuclear, we don't do that. So we don't have the capability in the country. That's going to take a long time to build up. The few coming out of the University of New South Wales are not going to be able to cope with it. This leads me to just say things like, construction of a nuclear capability in less than 20 years is a fairy tale. And even if we do build a few reactors here, there's the intractable waste problem. A nuclear reactor, the big ones that generate the huge power that we might need, produce 25 tonnes, metric tonnes of fuel pellets, waste fuel pellets per year per reactor. In the US, the annual total of waste from their generators, and they've got 190, is it? Paul, you might know better than me, generators in the US. 88,000 tonnes of radioactive waste material. Now, I don't know if any of you went to Grace Stanky's around Australia vaudeville show by Nuclear for Australia. Any hands up? Oh, I was there. And yes, she's very attractive. She had an evening gown on, and all the males in the audience are my age. They're all looking wonderfully at her. And she spoke beautifully about how wonderful her dad got her into engineering, and then she did nuclear. She's actually the marketing manager for Constellation, which operates 35, I think, of the nuclear reactors in the United States. She tried to tell the audience there that waste was not a problem. It is all PPE equipment, protective masks and hands and gloves and things that we use. And it's all the tools we might use. They're all contaminated. And the building bits and pieces get contaminated. That's okay. We put them in a metal drum and we just keep people away from it. It's not a problem. You get more radiation from eating a banana, she said. Or an avocado. Just remember that. There's 2 fruit you'll have to avoid from now on. And then she went on to say, I've just flown from Perth to Brisbane and I've got more radiation in that flight than I have from working a whole year in my nuclear plant. Yeah, Miss America. What does all this mean? 20 years. It means waiting, waiting and waiting. Where do we get our energy from? Coal and gas. I think that tells you something. What happens when we just keep burning the coal and the gas to give us sort of energy that we need? Mind you, they're all running out, as I said. They're unreliable. The maintenance costs are enormous. We have a 2 billion tonne bomb of carbon emissions from that over that 20-year period. Are we going to tolerate that? But we have a credible solution available right now. Wind and solar. Currently 43% of Australia's energy is provided by renewable energy, and it's growing rapidly. But if we have a change of government, they may scrap the targets and go for the coal and gas while they wait to get the nuclear industry up. Pumped hydro for backup and battery storage for short-term and frequency stabilisation are available. These are all engineering problems, easy to solve. We can do it. We do not need base load, as some people keep telling you. Do you know what base load really is? It was invented by the coal generation industry about 40 years ago. And it was because the coal-fired turbines and everything have to keep spinning overnight with a load to keep it efficient and maintained properly. So how do we get that load at night when business shuts down? So they went to the councils all around Australia and they said, you've got to put street lights everywhere. Leave all the buildings lit up at night for tourism. And that's what a Lord Mayor of Brisbane said to me. David, isn't it amazing? Look at that lovely burnt buildings, lit up, the tourists love it. Oh, that's just burning energy for nothing, Lord Mayor Campbell Newman. We can do this, but we're being offered a big red herring. Don't be fooled. It's a direct ploy to give the fossil fuel industry an extended life to cream massive profits from coal and gas extraction, and then when they do get nuclear involved, higher electricity prices because the costs, as you'll hear from John, are enormous. Thank you.
The next speaker on our list is Trish Frail. She is dialing in from Zoom, so should the technology gods shine on us tonight. Trish is a Ngamba elder and former campaign manager for Keep the Nuclear Free group, which was successfully opposed the creation of a nuclear waste dump in the western New South Wales town of Brewarrina. Aboriginal Brewarrina fish traps are well documented in this area and are still in use today. Trish's efforts ensured that the Bree's First Nations heritage and national environment were protected. Trish is the co-convener of the Australian Nuclear Free Alliance and is currently a Brewarrina councillor.
I'm Auntie Trish Frail. I'm a Ngamba woman from out western New South Wales, of Brewarrina. I'm called Auntie for the simple reason of the community decided I was to be classified as an elder. For the simple reason of I stood up and fought for the community to prevent a nuclear waste dump being built in our town. And at the time, the council came in, they had a wonderful meeting with the community and said, you know, all of these wonderful, fantastic things of what they had done in the previous year. And then they hit us with the bombshell that they were going to build a nuclear waste dump. And the community were just like, oh, we didn't quite know what to do or how to react to that. Then the next day, somebody said to me, Trish, do you realise that Brewarrina is known worldwide for the World Heritage fish traps? And if they were to build a nuclear waste dump here, it'll only ever be known for nuclear waste. And we went, oh no, well we can't have that, because I personally, I love my fish traps. I just adore them. And so I thought, no, that's not going to happen. And then I started a campaign, and I didn't really know what to do or how to go about it, but I used social media a lot. And then all these other people around Australia and around the world actually got on board. It just spread. And I also had, at the time he was David Shoebridge, he's now a senator. He came on board, he helped me, ANFA, which is the Australian Nuclear Free Alliance. they really came on board and helped me a lot. And so what we did was we went out and we educated the community. And I went door knocking, and I had all these a lot of young ones, all in year 9, 10, 11. They went around and they were knocking on the doors, and one of them said to me, I'm helping you, Trish, because one day I'm going to have children. And I don't want my children to be growing up around nuclear. So and I thought, oh wow, you're such a beautiful person. Anyway, so we educated the community, and we got all of the support from the, before that, the council had around about 96, they had around about 94% support. By the time I got out and I educated everybody, we got 96% support. And it's like, wow, that was a really great achievement. And as I keep saying about education. And so what I'm really concerned about now, so not just power plants, but we're also going to be needing nuclear waste dumps too. So, and people aren't acknowledging that, and the government definitely, Dutton is definitely not acknowledging that we will need waste dumps. And so, they're not going to send them overseas. So, yeah, they want to bury them here in Australia. The other thing is, we just came out of one of the worst droughts through Australia's history, not through our history. We have got a lot of Dreamtime stories about droughts. And we really look at Australia like how we don't have a lot of water, and how much water really is to be used for nuclear power and nuclear waste. And so we have to take that into consideration. And the federal government is just in the process of releasing a community drought resilience plan. And so just about every region throughout Australia is going to have one of these drought resilience plans. And so where is this all leading to? Like, we just don't have enough water in Australia as it is. And yeah, this is going to take out a lot more water. And not just water on the ground, but also down under. Look at the Artesian Basin, how much water is in that, and how much water will they try and take out of it, which again, that will come back to, I know all the First Nations people are in those areas, they will really fight hard to prevent that from happening, and they will prevent it from happening. So, but what I just really wanted to finish off on is my campaign. It went for roughly 3.5 months, and apparently that was one of the quickest anti-nuclear campaigns in the world. And I was quite shocked when I found that out, because I knew nothing. And yeah, I had so much support from my community, and the fact that they honoured me enough to then therefore call me an elder. So it's like, wow, that really is a great achievement. So yeah. But all I was going to say, but I did also want to acknowledge that I'm on Darug land, and to acknowledge the land that you've run, and every other First Nations person who is involved in this. It's great to see you. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Trish. Obviously, you know, your campaign was fought, I won't say long and hard, but in this case, short and hard. But we got the outcome that you were looking for, so well done to you. Staying on the topics of politics, our next speaker almost needs no introduction, but joining us tonight is Senator Larissa Waters, Greens Senator for Queensland. Before entering politics, Larissa worked as an environmental lawyer in the community sector for 8 years, advising people how to use the law to protect the environment. She was named Australian Young Environmental Lawyer of the Year in 2010 by the Law Council of Australia. Larissa's vision for Queensland is for a fair society and a clean economy that puts people, First Nations, connection to country, national parks, animals and farmland ahead of the profits of fossil fuel giants and billionaires. Can you please put your hands together for our lovely Senator, Larissa Waters.
Good evening. Thanks, Daniel, for that lovely introduction. I'd like to add my acknowledgement of the Kabi Kabi elders of this land and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded anywhere in this ancient land that we share. And so we have a lot of work to do to make sure that not only do we respect that this is and was always Aboriginal land, but that we can have some genuine reconciliation and healing in this nation, and that involves truth-telling and treaties and voice and reparations. And I want to particularly thank Kerry for your delightfully hilarious welcome. Laughter is so important in these dark times, so thank you for bringing us a lot of yourself there in your gorgeous welcome. And thanks so much to Aunty Trish for her wisdom and being able to join us tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge that we've got a lot of fabulous people in this room, but we've got two that I should particularly give a shout out to. Earlier today, I stood alongside Sue Etheridge and Renee Wills and launched their candidacy as Greens candidates for Fairfax and for Fisher. So do you want to stand up? I can see Sue and I think Renee's, here we are, yeah. So really proud of these two ladies and the impact that they'll continue to make and to be your voice, I hope, up here on the Sunshine Coast. Well, look, we're here tonight because we've got a bit of a faux debate, really. We've got a suggestion from Mr. Peter Dutton, who'd like to be the Prime Minister, that somehow the solution to all of our woes, to energy prices and to the climate crisis, is nuclear power. Now, I think that's bollocks, and that's the technical term. And I'm going to run through some of the reasons why I think that's the case. But I think it's a really interesting observation that the political context in which this suggestion has been made is that we've got the current government, the Labor Party, who were elected on a climate mandate and have done some okay things in renewable energy, and we've worked well with them on that. Unfortunately, they've been opening coal and gas mines like there's no tomorrow. So we've seen 32 coal and gas mines ticked off under Labor. And now we have Dutton, not content with that, is now putting this ridiculous fantasy, as my friend David described it, on the table. And the effect of that proposition is not that it's ever going to happen, folks. Spoiler alert, it's just so crazy and unaffordable, it's not going to happen. But what it will do is delay the transition off coal and gas, and it will delay that renewables transition and just conveniently keep delivering for the coal, oil and gas companies that make such generous donations, because they're such nice people, generously donate to both sides of politics, but in particular to the LNP. So I think that's why Mr. Dutton put what I think is a crazy notion on the table, because actually it benefits the vested interests and the current oligarchs and the mining companies that are having a disproportionate impact on our democracy already. So that's the context in which I approach this. So reasonable minds can differ on that, but that's the view that I've got. Now, in terms of why I think it's bollocks, I don't know why I've gone gone out the blocks with such a strong word there, but it's what I feel. Firstly, this is one of the most expensive options that we can have for energy. Okay, you want to pick the most ridiculous and incredibly pricey option, then that's the one. So nuclear is it. We know that the cleanest and, on this point, the cheapest form of energy is renewable energy. Like, you can't actually argue with the facts and figures there. It is the cheapest form of energy, clean energy, and nuclear is the most expensive. So firstly, it's way too expensive. Secondly, it's going to take forever. If it was ever to happen, and David's run us through this in a far more eloquent and structured way, if it was ever to happen, it's decades away. We've got none of those regulatory systems in place. We've got none of the expertise. We've got none of the facilities already built. We've got none of the workforce. It is ages away. So in terms of the climate crisis and the time that we've got to deal with it and to make that transition, nuclear can't help us. It is way too slow. Now, there's no solution. Third reason, there's no solution for nuclear waste. Nowhere in the world has found a permanent solution that they can have confidence it's going to stay put and not eke out and do further damage. So that is a huge worry, that we still don't have a solution for nuclear waste. Now, the other thing that we don't have guarantees on is whether or not the uranium that we might mine to use in these potential nuclear facilities could end up fueling the nuclear arms race. Now, we just had the reascension of Donald Trump, and I don't want that man to have any more nuclear weapons than he already has. And it's easy to joke about, but we are in crazy times, and we need to be leaning into peace and to an independent foreign policy and not adding to the world's nuclear arsenals. And we do that by mining uranium that we use in potentially in nuclear facilities, and that enables other uranium to be used in nuclear weapons. So, long story short, there's no guarantee it won't end up making the world's nuclear weapons worse. It's technically illegal, and David alluded to this, and I'm happy to go into that in greater detail as an environmental lawyer. It's one of the things, in fact, it's probably one of the only good things in John Howard's environment laws, which are still the laws that we operate under, and it's a complete ban on nuclear facilities. Now, that's good. That's good that that ban is in there, but think how difficult it might be, even if the worst happens and Mr Dutton becomes the Prime Minister. Now, the Greens are working hard for that not to happen, but if democracy delivers otherwise, then Mr Dutton would not only have to change the rules in the House of Representatives, where he might have the numbers or he might need to convince a few Teal independents to change their minds, but he would then have to overturn that law in the Senate as well. And it's mathematically impossible for the Liberals to get control of the Senate. And thank goodness for that, because remember 2004, when John Howard got control of both houses, the Senate and the Reps, we got work choices. And, you know, workers are only just coming back from that erosion of their rights. So it's illegal, and it's going to be impossible for Mr Dutton to change that, not to mention that all of the states and territory jurisdictions are actually opposed to it as well. So, I mean, it's just a crazy notion that's got no legs. There's a few other additional smaller points, but they're the main ones. A couple of other points, though. We don't actually have enough high-grade ore to underpin what Mr Dutton's proposing. It was mentioned to me last night, and hopefully it will come up in questions. We're already facing skyrocketing house premiums, and a learned person pointed out to me last night that our house insurance, all of the ones that this chap had looked at, exclude damage from nuclear facilities. So to put that another way, we're not insured against any nuclear accidents. And you've got Chernobyl, you've got Fukushima, you know, the list is as long as your arm. So there are so many reasons why this nuclear proposal from Dutton is just so ridiculous. It can only be a propping up of coal and gas in the meantime, because it just makes absolutely no sense. It's an elaborate distraction from the fact that they're very happy with the Labor Party approving 32 new coal and gas mines, and they want to approve even more. So that's why we've gathered you here tonight, folks. At least that's why I'm speaking to you tonight. I want you to look at it in that context, and I want you to think really carefully about your vote, because we've got a very important election coming up, and the Greens want to keep Dutton out, but we want to push Labor to act on climate, but also on the housing crisis, on the cost of living crisis, on the equality crisis, on all of the damn crises that are afflicting us at the minute. And we can do that. At the moment, there's 1 in 3 big corporations that pay zero tax. And if we closed that loophole, we would raise the revenue to fund things like dental and mental into Medicare, to fully fund public schools, to cancel student debt and make uni and TAFE properly free like it used to be, and to really help households and small businesses get solar if they don't already, and you've got good solar up here on the Sunshine Coast, but then also get batteries and have everyone pitch in on that transition to clean energy. So that's what we can do if we actually raise revenue from the big corporates who at the moment are laughing all the way to the bank, while the rest of us are in a cost of living crisis that's layered on top of a housing crisis that's layered on top of the climate crisis. And so, yeah, that's why we're having a debate tonight. And I really welcome other people's views and opinions on this, and I'm looking forward to your questions when it comes to it. But the Greens are here proudly saying no new coal and gas, no nuclear. Let's go clean, green renewables that we know is cheaper and is job rich and will help us tackle the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis. So thanks, everyone.
Next on the speaking list is John Quiggin, Professor of Economics. John is Professor at the University of Queensland. He's a prominent research economist and commentator on Australian and international economic policy. He's a former member of the Climate Change Authority and has worked extensively on issues associated with the clean energy transition. I would like you now to please make welcome to the stage John Quiggin.
In the Australian context, this is a red herring. Nuclear power isn't going to be around for a very long time, and really Senator Matt Canavan let the cat out of the bag, said this is just a political fix. The coalition wants to preserve coal, but they can't say that, and therefore they're putting forward nuclear as a distraction from the fact that what they're going to do is slow down the transition as long as possible. They can't in the end delay it long enough to bring nuclear on, so it's just a fix for the next 3 or 6 years. It's fair to say, though, that they're not the only ones doing this, and lots of people who you might think know better have seen advocacy of nuclear as a solution to the fact that the transition isn't 100% easy. So we've seen people like Macron in France, Starmer, Joe Biden talk about big increases in nuclear power as a way of solving political problems. And so I want to ask, it's reasonable to ask whether these people are making this point, is there something to back it up? And I'm going to stick as much as I can to the economics, but also the numbers. So if you look at the page for the World Nuclear News, I do regularly, you'll see that there's 60 odd nuclear power stations under construction at this very moment. Now 60 isn't very much compared to the massive amounts of solar in particular that's going in, but it's a lot. The only problem is 56 of those are Russian or Chinese designs. There are 4 nuclear reactors being constructed in the world at the moment that are not Russian or nuclear, and all 4 of them are way behind time and way over cost. So the answer is that despite these announcements, which have been going on for a number of years now, none of the countries I've mentioned have actually managed to get the starting line on nuclear power, despite the fact that they have existing sites, brownfield sites they're called, with nuclear power stations right there waiting to be replaced, despite the fact that they have decades and decades of experience, and despite the fact that, of course, they have an ageing workforce. One of the big problems we have, should we ever do this, is not only will we have to import foreign experts, we'll have to import them before they get too old, because the average age of the nuclear workforce is about my age. We're getting pretty tired. So why is this? I mean, we've seen, of course, and those of you who have visited France perhaps will have seen lots of nuclear power stations. Why is it that we're seeing nothing coming up the starting blocks? Why is it that the costs seem so prohibitive? And the first observation to make is that nuclear power is the exact opposite of solar and of information technology. It's technology which has got more expensive over time. So the French managed to deliver a large number of nuclear power stations in a relatively short period of time in the 1970s. How did they do this? Well, again, an older audience, a lot of us will remember the oil shock when the price of oil rose dramatically, and people did big things. In particular, the Prime Minister of France, a few months afterwards, got up and said, we're going all nuclear, all electric. That was in, I think, January of 1974. 10 months later, they were pouring concrete. Nothing went through Parliament. There were, of course, no environmental impact statements. The government of the day said, we're picking one design and sticking with it. How did they afford it? Well, essentially, a lot of the money came out of the military budget. France was then a state which makes China look decentralised, an incredibly strong central state. They could allocate capital as much as they wanted, and they did so. And they built 50-odd nuclear power stations in the space of 10 years. Then the whole thing ran out of puff. Costs were going up steadily through this time, partly because the cheap capital had gone, but also because big construction, mega projects, have not got cheaper over time. It's much more expensive to build a highway now than it was 50 years ago, even allowing for inflation. And that's partly a matter of things like environmental standards, partly a matter simply of the fact that we haven't had the technological progress in stuff to do with concrete that we have had across the economy as a whole. That means it gets dearer and dearer. And so the French, in fact, those four I mentioned, there were 5 or 6 stations under construction a few years ago. One of those, a place called Flamanville in France, came in at 30 billion euros, I think, for a 1.6 gigawatt station. That's about the size of 2 coal-fired power stations. Massively more expensive than even new coal. Stupendously more expensive than solar. The effect was to send the French electricity company, EDF, bankrupt. They'd been privatised in the early 2000s. They had to be renationalised to keep them afloat. And the French equivalent of the Auditor General is now saying, you really need to put horns in. Macron wants you to build 6 power stations. The British are hoping you build some. You really can't afford to do this. You need to stop. So looking at the UK case, of course, 2 of those stations, a place called Hinkley Point in the UK, they've been going for a fair while. Talking of David's schedule, the promoter promised British people in 2017 you'll be cooking your Christmas turkeys on electricity from Hinkley Point. 2017 was a while ago. They're now suggesting, well, maybe in 2030 you might possibly be reheating your Christmas turkeys from quite some time ago. The British are still pushing on. They still got another power station in mind to replace. Again, same design. And until very recently, we're saying, well, we learned from our mistakes. Sure, we ran 3 times over cost at Hinkley, but now we know. Sadly, the latest news is that Sizewell C will be even more expensive than Hinkley Point. The result is that years after we're supposed to have reached financial close, they still haven't found anybody outside the UK willing to invest in this project. They've given them a regulatory solution which guarantees them, I think, £100 a megawatt hour. That's roughly £200, 200 Australian dollars. They had to, of course, throw out the Chinese who were going to build it. I'm sure the Chinese or the Russians would have been happy to build a nuclear power station in Britain, but sadly that idea seems to have gone by the board. The result is, I think, sadly, probably not in time for this election, we'll be hearing fairly soon from Mr Starmer that, or Sir Starmer, that sadly this project has not gone ahead. Similarly, I think it's highly unlikely that the power stations in France will go ahead. And of course, while until very recently American Republicans were talking about nuclear power, and despite the fact that Trump has rampaged over every possible thing he could, there isn't the slightest sign of any revival in nuclear power in the US. Unlike France and the UK, they still have a bunch of objections, and of course Australia, they still have a bunch of objections to the public actually owning and constructing and building power stations. So they have to find somebody, Constellation Energy perhaps, willing to put their money where their mouth is and build a new power station. That's not going to happen. If we look back at the recent record, it's not hard to see why. They had a plan for a massive nuclear renaissance, 20 or 30 new power stations. 4 of them were started, 2 were abandoned in South Carolina after, I think, $10 billion apiece had been spent on them. Supposedly 70% complete. The proponents finally decided, look, it is simply not worth finishing that project at all. 2 more limped over the finishing line a couple of years ago, and every other project that was listed in the so-called nuclear renaissance has been abandoned. So the answer is quite simply, unless some magical turnaround happens in the cost structure, not only are they 20 years in the future regardless, we really might as well be waiting for nuclear fusion. I did actually get a comment on that, somebody, when I talked about this thing. And indeed, I'll leave you with the observation that nuclear fusion is the fuel of the future and always will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Interesting numbers ahead of us there. Oh, don't go flat on me. Next on the agenda for tonight, we have Dr. Paul Wilson, electrical engineer. He comes to us tonight with over 50 years of experience, including first-hand work on the reactors at Hartwell Atomic Energy and Research Establishment in Berkshire in the United Kingdom. As well as that, we have first-hand experience with the nuclear engineering, working in the ZETA project, the Zero Energy Thermonuclear Assembly, the earliest attempt to build a nuclear fusion reactor that we just heard about. So, with your lovely gratitude, I would like you to put your hands together again for Dr. Paul Wilson.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. I'm probably the only person in the room who's actually worked on nuclear reactors. I'm not the only person in the room. Yeah, the reactors that I worked on, there were 6 of them. And they've got intriguing names. They were all research reactors. GLEAP, BEPO, DIDO, LIDO, Pluto and Daphne were the names of the 6 reactors that I worked on. So I've got a picture of Dounreay here. Dounreay is in the far north coast of Scotland, and it was actually created originally as a research reactor, but they turned it into a power station as well. It produced electricity for 23 years when it really became redundant and they closed it down. It's mothballed now. It's awaiting demolition, and I don't think anybody actually knows how to demolish it. There are 2 reactors there in the spherical dome and the dome on the left-hand side. What was interesting was that a lot of radioactive waste was sent to Dounreay, and what they did was they just dumped it in the sea. So now they've got a major problem of cleaning up the seabed just off the north of Scotland. We just heard about Hinkley Point, number 3 nuclear power station that is under construction at the moment and running very late. The reason I showed you this picture is to show you the incredible complexity of a nuclear power station. Just look how busy that site is. It's unbelievable. And this is why they're so difficult to build, and this is why they're so expensive to build. And I'm going to allude to this a little later on, but they're actually putting the dome on top of the containment vessel. Now that building is the container for the reactor itself, because the reactor building has to be completely airtight. In order to stop isotope escaping from the building is run at a lower than air pressure, so that if you get any leaks, the air leaks inwards through it. And getting in and out of the building is fairly entertaining. It's like being on a spacecraft. Anyway, I just wanted to show you that so that you could see how incredibly complex these things are and why they're so expensive, you know, as a visual image. Okay, can we go to the next? Right, this is your turn. How many nuclear accidents can you think of, do you know of? We've heard of 2 so far. Yeah, 3 Mile Island was one. Anybody else? Okay, the international scale, and the international scale doesn't cover all accidents, it only covers the serious ones. I mean, there's one nuclear power station in Europe that had 800 accidents on their list of accidents, just on one power station. Right, so there are 37 accidents severe enough to write an INES rating. So these are the 37. Level 7 is the highest. So we got Chernobyl and Fukushima, which you've almost certainly heard of. Level 6, Kishtim, 1957, and 3 Mile Island. Level 5, Chalk River, which is in Canada. Wind scale in England, Idaho Falls and Monroe, and there's the list goes further down of these are serious nuclear accidents that get an INES rating. Yeah, so it's more dangerous than you think. Well, you've all heard of Chernobyl. That's what it looks like now. Yeah, I mean that you can see the reactor building. You can see what happened to it. Yeah, when it didn't actually explode. It basically caught fire. It was virtually a slow explosion, and it just wrecked the building. Of course, that site now, you can't go there. It's just not safe. The whole site is very, very dangerous. Yeah. So, how on earth are you going to demolish that? Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute. All right. Next one. Kishtim. Who's heard of Kishtim? Nobody. Yeah, one person. Yes. You won't have heard of it. 1957. This was in Russia, and you can see what happened when it went up. Well, it was the same sort of destruction to the building, and the map shows you how the contamination carried across Russia and then right across Europe. Yeah, very nasty. Radioisotopes drifting in the wind from the east. Yeah. Next one. Wind scale. Now I do know a lot about wind scale. I've been there several times actually, and I want you, I'll just point out, when this exploded in 1957, I was 13 years of age, and I'll show you where I lived. I was living there. Yeah, so I was exposed to it. Yeah, just didn't seem to have affected my age, but what happened was, and the thing we had, in fact, my family had only just got a television, and it was on the news a lot. And what was happening right across the north of England was that all the dairy farms had to dump their milk because the milk was contaminated with cesium isotopes and iodine isotopes. And they were just dumping it in the creeks and the streams. They couldn't sell it. And you know, we were really short of milk there for quite a while. So that was a real one. And you can see the hole in the reactor building where it just virtually exploded. What happened actually, the core of the reactor was made of graphite blocks, and the graphite caught fire. Yeah, so it just burnt and burnt and burnt. Yeah. All right, next. Okay, we've already heard speakers talk about radioactive waste. There is a lot more radioactive material around than just the exhausted fuel for the plant. When you're in that container building, and I've been in a couple, everything's contaminated. everything, the dust in the air, everything you can think of, which is why it's kept at lower than air pressure, and so that you only get leaks in. Right? Just think about it. You've got contaminated concrete, walls, floors, furniture, all your clothing soiled, yeah, with radioactive isotopes. How do they dispose of it? And right now, Britain is still searching for a dump site for their radioactive waste, and they can't find one. Right? So it's just being kept. It's actually being kept at Sellafield. All right, next. Okay, here's the big one. The big issue for me isn't what we've talked about so far. It's how on earth do you demolish a nuclear power station at the end of its life? That's the big problem. Demolition and cleanup costs. Now this is Sellafield, and in fact if you have a look at the tower, that's Windscale number 2, yeah, the reactor I just showed you. Windscale number 1 was a similar tower. They actually demolished that. But Windscale number 2, nobody can go near it. It's so radioactive that people can't get close enough to demolish. Yeah? And the rest of it is the Sellafield power station, which is now closed down. It's really got way past its use-by date. And the costs of demolition has just blown out. They've just done a new estimate of how much it's going to cost, and they're talking about 136 billion English pounds to demolish it. Yeah? Frightful. How much electricity did they produce? It wasn't even close to that. Yeah? So for me, the big issue about nuclear power isn't the costs of construction and so on that we've heard about. It's the cost of demolition at the end of life. Yeah? Okay, next. So this is really my last slide about nuclear power. The cost of ownership must include the cost of demolition at end of life. And I did some work in researching how many nuclear reactors we've got around the world that have been closed down. And these are not the military reactors. They're not the ones to create weapons and the research ones. This is just power station reactors that have been closed down. 191 closed down. 15 have been demolished to a clean site. Of the 176 mothballed or abandoned, the majority have been abandoned. And what the Americans have been doing is, oh, we'll just declare bankruptcy. Yeah, the company just went bankrupt, oh dear. You know, what are we going to do with the reactor? Well, we just leave it. Yeah? So this is a serious problem. Serious problem. Yeah. Okay, next one. Right, this is my favourite alternative as an electrical engineer, and I've worked as an electrical engineer all my working life, all my career, and I particularly like concentrated solar thermal power. Right, Spain is the world leader. They have got 51 solar thermal power stations, amounting to, they're not very big, they're about 50 megawatts, 2.3 gigawatts of power, and they've got 8 gigawatt hours of nighttime energy. Not all the Spanish ones have got storage, heat storage, but there are a sufficient number to keep Spain going through the night. Yeah, so next. All right, this is what they look like. Yeah. In Australia, we've got 2. The CSIRO has a tiny little one just outside Newcastle, and there is a small commercial one just being built fairly recently, and that's it. So why aren't we doing this? And And I appeal to the politician in the room, why on earth aren't we building these? Yeah? Right? So this is how they work, right? These are mirrors, right? And they're stainless steel sheets. They last forever, right? They don't deteriorate like solar panels on your rooftop do. Solar panel on your rooftop, hey, you're going to be lucky to get 15 to 20 years out of one before you've got to scrap them. These are stainless steel mirrors. They last for 100 years. Yeah? And they rotate and they focus the heat from the sun, not the light from the sun, the light and the heat, onto the power tower in the middle. So per square metre of mirror, you're getting roughly twice as much energy as you do from the light, yeah? The solar panels you got on your roof. And as Spain's the expert, and we could buy one off the shelf from Spain and have it up and running in 2 years. Yeah, we could. They're the experts. Next. All right, and here, this is my last slide. This is one in the United States. So Spain's not the only country that's doing this. I like that one because it shows you the power tower, and the glowing white thing at the top is a huge tank full of molten salt. Molten salt's amazing because it stores an enormous amount of heat per cubic metre. Enormous amount of heat. So, you know, that power tower will run the power station through the night. Okay, and that's my offering for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, for the information on demolition costs, but more importantly, alternatives. Claire Silcott, who is an energy strategist. Claire is the Queensland Conservation Council's energy strategist, working to replace coal-fired power stations with clean energy. She's a renewable energy engineer with 10 years of experience in electricity market modelling, zero carbon transmission planning and community energy development in both London and here, well, not here, but in Brisbane, in Queensland here. So please welcome our last speaker for the night, Claire Silcott.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've heard pretty comprehensively why nuclear isn't a good solution for Australia and for our climate crisis. It is, in fact, a political fix that the LNP have come up with. And I think that in these dark times, we need to celebrate any wins we can. And really, I think that the fact that the LNP think that coal is a thing that they can't be advocating for and win an election in the broader Australian context is a real sign that we, and particularly the leadership of First Nations and Pacifica communities and communities around the country have shown to show that we need to move away from coal. And also, as David mentioned, that our coal-fired power stations are literally blowing up. That's another compelling argument. So the LNP is turning to a bit of a different tactic that I wanted to talk a little bit to you about tonight to kind of hopefully inoculate you a bit against some of the propaganda that's coming against renewables. Because the renewable energy transition is working in Australia. Queensland's lagging a bit behind the rest of the nation, but we're still at over 30% of our electricity coming from renewable sources. And rooftop solar is the biggest source of that. A decade ago, we had no large-scale renewable energy in Queensland, and a trickle, less than 3% coming from rooftop solar. So this is working, and it's well underway. And our vision is that we continue this transition to create a restorative energy industry that increases biodiversity, that empowers First Nations people and regional communities, and provides reliable, affordable, renewable energy. But the unfortunate truth is that we're not seeing that and that vision play out with all projects. We are seeing projects develop here in Queensland in areas of high biodiversity with poor community engagement that aren't delivering benefits to the community. And the key reason that we have to remember why this is happening is because we have terrible planning and nature protection laws in Queensland. So the fossil fuel lobby want us to be fighting between the speed and scale at which we need to take climate action and the biodiversity crisis and the need to protect the remnant vegetation that we have, the reason that those are pitted against each other is actually because we are not protecting nature in any of our developments. And we saw with the recent shelving of the EPBC reforms that the fossil fuel lobby doesn't want to fix that problem. So it's so important that we keep that on the agenda for the next government, that we need to reform those nature protection laws. But it's also important to keep in perspective what's happening in Queensland. In the latest data that we have from 2021-22, Queensland cleared 320,000 hectares of trees. 15% of these were remnant vegetation, and less than 0.5% was for infrastructure, including renewables. My estimation is that if we keep approving wind farms without improving our nature protection laws, we would clear around 20,000 hectares of vegetation to build up to 80% renewables. So that's just over 5% of what we're clearing in a single year over the next decade. But also, I didn't study renewable energy engineering to help clear remnant vegetation on Queensland's ridgelines. Like, that's not the vision of the future that I want. And luckily there are a huge amount of ways that we can improve renewable energy projects, and there's great work happening all around the country to do this. From improving the siting, to co-location with agriculture or even biodiversity, to rehabilitation and pest management of the land underneath renewable energy, there's so much opportunity. In the New England, the Community Power Agency have written a guide to help improve biodiversity in grasslands under solar panels. We're doing work with the Western Downs Regional Council on lasting community benefit funds. In South Australia, a wind farm has added to a national park and provided for management support of that national park as part of their offset strategy. There's increasing work looking at what a net positive impact from the renewable energy industry looks like. 2 weeks ago, I was up in central Queensland in Rockhampton and Gladstone, where we're supporting regional groups to come together to develop a nature positive plan for the energy transition in their region. Because we do have to be real about the impacts of renewable energy. At the end of the day, a lot of these companies are more multinational corporations that know how to use our dodgy laws to roll over nature and communities and make money. But a positive side effect of doing that for renewables is that we don't also cook the planet. So we have to lean into these uncomfortable and hard conversations and work out how to get the best solution for nature and climate. And that's why it's so important to be having conversations like these, understanding our energy supply a bit better, understanding what are real solutions for the climate crisis, and making sure that we then communicate that to our friends, our family, and most importantly, our MPs and candidates ahead of the federal election. Thanks.
We've got loads of amazing questions from our audience. So somebody has asked if nuclear power stations are a threat as war targets, having recently observed the news that the Chernobyl containment dome had been penetrated by a warhead. But Chernobyl's not the problem. The problem over there at the moment is another nuclear power plant called the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And Zaporizhzhia was taken over by the Russian military purely because they wanted it as a storeroom for their military regime. They used that facility to store all of their weapons, ammunition, logistics vehicles, trucks, tanks, you name it, because they know that Ukraine is not going to send any artillery shells in that direction. So are they a war target? Absolutely they are. Are they a war target for the reasons that you think they are? No, they are not. They are a war target only for a strategic reason. For those who hold the nuclear power plants can leverage the fear of an explosion from that nuclear power plant to their own advantage. And that is the only threat that we will see from a nuclear power plant in times of war. Obviously, Dr. Wilson, you finished with some quite rousing pictures there of the molten salt thermal plant. The question from the audience is, How does that work in a geographically diverse grid? Do we place these plants out in the desert somewhere, or do they need to be located close to our centres of population, and how much land would they be taking up? There's a microphone in front of you.
Okay, I won't deny that they do take a little bit of land, but my wife, who's severely disabled, and that's one of the reasons why I was late tonight actually, she really wanted to go to Ayers Rock, and we flew from Brisbane across to Ayers Rock. And what impressed me was how soon you hit the desert. Yeah, it's the green country is over very shortly, and probably 3/4 of the flight from Brisbane to Ayers Rock was over just straight desert. Yeah. Now, if we wanted to put these plants anywhere, it would be out there. So the question that rose then from Peter Dutton was the advantage of the existing coal-fired power stations is that they've got the poles and wires in place, right? So, being an electrical engineer, I had a look at the map of all the power lines across Queensland, and it's amazing how far west the power lines actually go. Yeah. Now, if you've got power lines going out right to the edge of the desert, if you've got electricity going west, electricity can come east over the same wires. Yeah. So we actually have a lot of the infrastructure in place, and you know, for my book, the place to put the solar thermal that we buy from Spain would be out on the very edge of the desert, yeah, and just bring the electricity this way. In fact, if you look at a map of all the electrical supply lines around Queensland and around Australia, there are a lot more of them than you think.
Very good, thank you. Sticking with that topic of the number of power stations in Australia, we've got a number of questions here that quite marry onto the same theme. Is that one? There's a very strong sense from the panel that nuclear power plays no part in the energy infrastructure in Australia. But if it was to play a part, and since other countries do it with between 10 and 50% of their electrical grid, if there was a nuclear energy industry in Australia, hypothetically, is there any amount that would make sense if we had it delivered in a time frame that would actually make sense? Now, I know that's a hypothetical question, but if we could deliver it inside that 20-year period, would there be any amount of nuclear power that would possibly make sense? Open to the panel. Yeah, please answer.
Yeah, I mean, the right time frame was last century. I think it's a pretty good case that if we built more nuclear power instead of coal last century, it would have been a better choice. Solar wasn't affordable then, but even a 20-year time frame makes no sense at all. Really, when we look at the coal-fired power stations we have, the vast majority of them have closure dates well inside that. Yeah, most of them before 2030. They've been brought forward a little bit in some cases because of the transition, but we can't really keep any of it going beyond this point. And I think, as David said, the whole idea of this is this magical notion of baseload, which is in fact a supply notion, not a demand notion. That is, there isn't really any need to have substantial amounts of power being generated at 3 o'clock in the morning. The whole problem has always been finding somebody to use that power by, well, excess lighting, but also, of course, off-peak hot water, which now makes no sense economically because it's precisely the most expensive time to generate power that were being paid to take it most cheaply.
There's a sense, if I can just, there's a sense in the argument that nuclear is big and powerful and masculine and tough, and that's where this idea of baseload comes from. It's a powerful statement, whereas renewables are fluffy and light. They're dispersed, and it's just so wrong. Get rid of it quick.
All right, thank you. I've lost the question. Okay, so another question from the audience. There was a mention during the first speaker, of a figure of 2,000 litres per second. So the question from the audience is, over a given 24-hour period, how much water does a nuclear power plant consume? Are the water sources from existing dams and rivers, etc., I'd say that's from the coal-fired power stations, are they adequate? And there's a follow-up question, does it contaminate the water?
I can give you a hint of that with what's happening with Fukushima and the fact that they're trying to demolish it now. And one of the things that they were doing was dumping heavy water into the ocean. And there was a huge outcry about that. Right? Now, heavy water is deuterium oxide, and the neutron's got more electrons in it. When I was an apprentice engineer working on nuclear reactors, we used to toast the Queen at Christmas using heavy water. So in fact, the heavy water's harmless, right? But what is dangerous is what's called tritiated water, right, which is super heavy water. And so what the Japanese were doing, they were dumping heavy water, harmless, into the ocean and trying to avoid dumping tritiated water into the ocean. That's my contribution.
Thank you. Just on the question about the volume of water required for a power station.
Yeah. The fact is that nuclear reactors themselves, when you shut them down by putting the rods down to tame the decay of the atoms, they still radiate heat, even when you've so-called shut them down. So you've got to have water continuously going through it, even when it's off. And that's where most of the water is needed. But they are incredibly, incredibly hot, aren't they, Paul?
Oh, yeah.
So the water going through to keep it cool, to contain it, has to be put back into the source where you get it from. So it's not wastewater, but it is warming the river and warming the ocean.
Yeah. And there's a side issue to that too. To cool a reactor down takes days and days and days. It's very, very slow to cool down, which means that during that time, all your pumps have got to be working, all your pipes, all your valves. The last thing you want is a pump failure. Yeah, which is why all your hardware, your pumps and pipes and taps and everything, you've got at least 3 of them. Yeah, lots and lots of redundancy, just so you can keep cooling it down.
Fukushima is still boiling. Down in the hole, it is. They cannot stop it. It's still there. How many years after? What was it?
Oh, I can't remember.
Yeah. They just can't stop it.
Thank you. Speaking of dumping deuterated water, deuterium water. We've had a couple of questions here about the waste. Obviously, Paul, you touched on. It's not just the fuel rods. It's the concrete. It's the vessels. It's the PPE. It's all sorts of different things. How I believe I'm going on a bit of a limb here, but I believe Peter Dutton said that each fuel change, it's like the size of a Pepsi can or something. He said something ridiculous like that. How incorrect is that? I mean, how much waste are we talking about for a single nuclear reactor? Oh, and the question is, what do we do with it?
Once again, when I was working on nuclear reactors, we saw trucks going out of the site almost every day, and they were full of waste. And it wasn't like the spent fuel's trivial in comparison with all the other stuff. You know, almost everything that you've got going inside a reactor building is contaminated. Yeah, and clothing was actually one of the biggest issues, because if your clothing's contaminated with radioactive elements, you can't wear it the next day. You know, you've got to dump it. And what they were doing actually, I know what they were doing. They were shipping it up the motorway to Lancashire, taking it out on a boat into the Irish Sea and dropping it overboard. And as a result of that, when I was a small child, we used to get fish from Fleetwood, right? The Fleetwood fishermen were put out of business because their fish were coming up radioactive. That's a true story.
You'll find a lot of nuclear proponents run around with a tiny little pellet about that big, and they'll stand up in front of you and say, that's all there is in a nuclear reactor, his little pellet. But it's not one pellet, is it? How many pellets?
A lot. I've seen them.
It's tens and tens of thousands. Yeah.
So if
Well,
anyone,
I gave the figure 25 tonnes per year from one reactor, 88,000 tonnes a year out of the US reactors.
So if anybody wants to know what the size of a pellet is, if you take a chapstick and you wind up about twice what you would need to, maybe about the size of your finger in size. Yeah. So wind up a chapstick and cut that much off the top of it. That is one pellet of enriched uranium. Yeah. And I got asked a question before about how much fuel do they put in and how much do they take out. And the thing is, a nuclear power plant is an evolution. You start with the power plant approximately 15% fueled. I'm sure I'm going to get corrected on this one. It's not completely filled with fuel. And as each year goes on, you add more and more and more. So over the course of the first maybe 14 years, you start to completely fill up the reactor. And then at the end of the 7 years, you start taking fuel out, and then it's just a constant cycle. So there isn't a lot of fuel. It's not a huge amount. But the reactor I worked at was 12 stories tall, and the reactor component of it was at the top of it, and it was about 8 stories. And inside each fuel chamber is what's called a stringer. And a stringer is about, the fuel stringer is about the size of a very large man's thigh. And they drop that, and it's about 8 stories long. And it's just full of these little chapsticks the whole way down until it gets to about a metre from the end, and then it's all electronics and stuff. But everything inside that is radioactive at the end of its life. And everything it touched is radioactive. And everything that went in there to cool it down is radioactive. And everything that went into the building and stayed there for any amount of time is radioactive. And every person that goes in there gets a little badge, and it's got a little marker on it, and it tells you when you're too radioactive and you can't go to work the next day. So that's what it's like working in a nuclear reactor. Anyway, aside from that, my experience, we've got 3 more questions here. This question is on the economics of the community and the impacts to the community. And Larissa mentioned this earlier, that says that insurance does not cover fallout or radioactivity or any other damage coming from nuclear fissile material. Given that, I think it was already mentioned that we need to do surveys and feasibility studies and all that sort of stuff, which would take an enormous amount of time. And I believe Mr. Dutton said that they would just forcibly acquire the land required to buy the nuclear power station site. Would that also include all of the uninsurable land that would now surround those facilities?
Quick comment leaving aside, the insurance is these areas will need an exclusion zone and then an evacuation zone. So that hasn't, I think, various people have said this will be great. They haven't yet had the government come around and say, your house is in the exclusion zone, or your house is in the evacuation zone, we'll have to have a plan for you to get out of it. I think those of us who are worrying about cyclones, I think we're a lot more worried about that. So I think that among the many delays in the process, one is going to be turning what might be some community consent in some places into acceptance of the fact that the footprint of these plants is much greater than the area of the reactor. It's a large area around them.
Thank you. Any further?
I just want to add the biodiversity impacts. We saw some of your really impactful pictures, Paul. Thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. And you showed us the broken buildings. But for me, when I think of Chernobyl, I think not only of the humans, but I think of the wasteland that's been created and the fact that nothing's growing there anymore. And a lot of those creatures are genetically altered, and that's, that lasting impact is something to be avoided. And on the insurance issue, I mean, people are already finding that the climate crisis is increasing their home insurance. And if you're concerned about that, well, firstly, you're right to be, but let's not make it incredibly worse by having this crazy nuclear notion with these radius of potential impact zones that will then have to be factored in. And there's some concern in some communities, and fair enough, about the siting of renewable energy. Well, the massive impacts and the disruption that nuclear reactors and any potential incident could cause, they leave that for dead.
Last year, then Prime Minister Scott Morrison introduced us all to this new idea of AUKUS and the fact that we would potentially be buying a whole bunch of nuclear power submarines, not from France, and tearing up a contract and years already spent on that, but from the United States. Is there a possibility that the AUKUS deal is somehow tied to this nuclear power pipe dream?
That's a good question, but firstly, remember Donald Trump doesn't even know what AUKUS is. Which actually was the first good thing that he said so far, because we think that's just the dodgiest and most expensive and wasteful arrangement that our beloved former Prime Minister Scott Morrison came out with. That was a political fix for him at the time, and he's now hitched us even closer to the American wagon and committed us $368 billion to nuclear submarines that I don't think are going to make us any safer. They're not going to de-escalate any of the world's conflicts, are they? And we're not even guaranteed to get them anyway. Pissed off Macron, who in that wonderful little exchange, I mean, he's obviously very, very good at doing that. And so we've burned relationships there. And then the Americans don't even want to give us any submarines because they're so slow on building them. They want to keep the ones they're making for themselves. So, I mean, honestly, there's no redeeming features to this arrangement. And yes, the only positive thing that Trump's done is to not know what AUKUS was, and that gives me hope that we might exit from it.
And finally, I will summarise this one to effectively say this in as best as I can from the audience member. But we're finding, and this audience is not isolated, but we're finding that we are talking within echo chambers, be it online or in person. We are speaking to the converted, is one term you will quite often hear. The next election that does come up, whether it's on April the 12th or May the 2nd or whatever day it's going to be, I'm budgeting 8th, 12th. We're going to see a significant amount of information and misinformation. We have seen what that brings when we look at what's happened over in the United States, where you've now basically got Donald Trump elected on the back of tribalism, for no disrespect to how we use that term over here. But how are we supposed to, in Australia, deal with the fact that people of learned sentiment, as in the people who have the lived experience and have the knowledge are muffled by the voices that are amplified by bots, by social media campaigns, by political campaigns that care nothing for the truth and only for the power. How is it that we are supposed to deal with that as people, as a community?
Might make a start on that. Well, we don't have any truth in political advertising laws, folks. So unfortunately, all of that nonsense that you hear that sounds wrong, it can be wrong, and it's not breaking any laws. And we had a chance to legislate truth in political advertising laws, and the government actually did introduce a bill to do that. And on the same day they introduced the bill, they also said they had no intention of progressing that bill, which is somewhat perplexing. And so we do have the rise of disinformation. We have a post-truth world, and the only way we can counter that, in the absence of truth in political advertising laws, is by talking to one another and by cutting through all of that nonsense and that disinformation and misinformation online, and just having one-on-one conversations. And that's something that each of you might feel a bit more empowered to do after you've heard from the amazing speakers tonight. Might feel a bit more confident doing that. And that people listen to their friends and peers and colleagues. All of the political research tells us that actually the most persuasive conversation that you can have is someone that you know, with a friend or with a colleague. So you're really powerful in that regard, and we do have a very important election coming up. So if anyone hasn't yet volunteered, now hopefully it's for the Greens, but look for anyone whose values you feel aligned to, then please put yourselves forward to do that kind of volunteer work, whether it's chatting with folk at market stalls, whether it's letterboxing, whether it's door knocking, like we're doing a lot of here at the Greens. Having those connections, it not only builds connection and builds community, but it can cut through some of that disinformation. So I think that's a really powerful option for people.
Thanks, Larissa. Thank you.
Can I just add one thing? Sorry. Just as well as doing that, I think one thing that I find personally helpful is to think about all the people that I've ever met in this instance in regional Queensland that we're often pitted against as people who live in the city versus the region, and everyone that I have met in the regions almost without exception wants what is best for their region and for their children, and it is the bots and the billionaires that is corrupting this, and the way that we potentially make that worse is by buying into it and not recognising the humanity of other people and having those conversations like Larissa was saying.
Yeah, just a brief bit of optimism on this. Very much unlike the US, that kind of tribalism of saying I voted Labor and or LNP and my parents did before them has disappeared almost completely in Australia in a way that basically has failed to happen in the US. People have completely reversed their values rather than abandon the political surrounds they have. In Australia, we have seen, I think, most people, a much larger group of people who are willing to look at the issues and say, I'm going to make up my own mind on this independently of that kind of historical loyalty.
One last comment?
Just the last comment. I think if you see something that you know is wrong on these posters and billboards, call it out, for God's sake, because too much of it is just left there for people to see. And this is the Atlas Network. Hands up those who know of the Atlas Network or have heard of it. Or Advance is one of the organisations in Australia that's part of that network. The Institute of Public Policies, Public Affairs, IPA, in Melbourne, they are part of it. A lot of the money going into it is from the coal industries and Gina Reinhart and others. Call those things out because they're nasty, they are lies, and their whole aim at the moment is to get rid of the Greens.
But we're not going to let them do that. That's where you come in.
All right, thank you. I would just like to thank our panel. I would like to thank all of you. I would like to thank the people who organised tonight and made tonight possible. So a big round of applause for them. Herb has been an anti-nuclear campaigner for as long as I have been alive. And take it away, Herb.
Back in the 70s, I was working with Friends of the Earth in Sydney, and doing the anti-uranium, anti-nuclear sort of thing. And it's interesting to see that even after 50 years, the arguments about and against nuclear power really haven't changed very much. But there's one thing which we realized, 50 years ago, which wasn't all that relevant then, but is more relevant now, is that in the case of ionizing radiation getting loose, and if it damages your house or contaminates your house, your insurance does not cover that. Most people are not really aware of that. It's buried in the PDS of what do you call it? PDS is the product disclosure statement. For instance, my home insurance is with Allianz, and on page 55 it says you're not covered for ionizing radiation or contamination by radioactivity from any nuclear fuel or nuclear waste, the combustion of nuclear fuel, including any self-sustaining process of nuclear fusion or nuclear weapons material. So in other words, there's a powerful argument for not having or not living near a nuclear power station, because if some accident happens and your land is contaminated, if we just put the health issues to one side, you could lose your house and you could lose your land too, because your land could be contaminated, like say around Fukushima or something, and not be habitable for perhaps decades. So that is something that you might want to check on your own PDS and your own home insurance as well. But I did kind of make a bit of a list and do a bit of research. And I found that this nuclear exclusion clause is common pretty much to every home insurance provider I found. Allianz, QBE, AMI, RACQ, NRMA, Suncorp, Australia Post, Bendigo Bank, Westpac, Commonwealth Bank, Honey Insurance, the NAB, Everyday Home Insurance, which is through Woolies, and Holland Insurance, which is an underwriter. Basically, none of them cover damage from nuclear materials. So that's something, and a very powerful argument for somebody who's maybe not particularly engaged in the more technical stuff. They can understand a danger which might void their home insurance. So I'll leave you with that. Huh?